Okay, so this is a little video I want to do about self-improvement and self-realization. So the world, as we know, is full of ideas about how to become a better self and improve the way the self is in the world. So, if I'm not strong, I'm going to improve myself by becoming physically fit in whatever way I choose, apparently, to do that. If I want to be smart, I'm going to, choose, apparently, something that will make me smarter and more likely to succeed in a sort of in the field of the intellect, you could say. If I feel like I'm spiritually bereft, I'll become a better self at being spiritual. I'll be more meditative. I'll be more studious about spiritual matters. I'll pray more or whatever. And all of this is in the realm of a separate self. A separate self that could be better and is moving along a path to be better. And the world is about that. That is what the world is about. Self-improvement and becoming a better, more effective, you could say, or more efficient, more beneficial self, you could say, for society or just for one's own self. So I want to be better individually, or I want to be better in a collective. And then usually what happened here was when I stumbled across what you could call self-realization, or non-duality, or the seeing of oneness, or that type of material, I'm going to be looking at that through the lens of the stuff I just described about self-improvement. So I'm imagining a better self at the end of the non-duality thing. So it's almost like no self is an improvement on that there is a self. It's important, I think, to note the distinction between, in the context we're using it, self-realization is the seeing of what one really is, which essentially isn't a self in the sense that it isn't an autonomous entity apart from anything else. So self-realization is a seeing of oneness that's all-inclusive, rather than the idea of a separate thing getting better in a larger separate environment, you could say. And these are not mutually exclusive. So you could say during the seeking, self-improvement was going on. Studying at school happened, exercise happened, all kinds of things happened that seemed to improve, you could say, the body, mind, organism. But none of that has anything to do with the self-realization. Self-realization can happen regardless of, you could say, the external perception of the character or the notion of a self. So this self could be the most meditative person, the most physically strong, or it could be an alcoholic, or a complete social misfit, or anything. It simply doesn't matter. Self-realization has nothing to do with any of that. A sinner, a saint, any of those dualistic notions have absolutely nothing to do with the seeing of oneness. Because oneness is immediately available. It's this. It's the only thing there is, and it has no prerequisites whatsoever. And you could say the seeing of oneness doesn't change anything because things like self-improvement can simply go on. So, this body-mind is learning how to drive, for instance, and you could call that self-improvement, the acquisition of a new skill. It's just that when it's seen that there's no self, there's no heaviness associated with any of that. So there's no desperate urge to become better because it's seen that there is no one to become better or to get worse. So there's a lightness in the functioning, in the appearance, because there's no need to get anywhere, and yet getting somewhere can appear to go on, which is a paradox. So for instance, there could even be what you could call ambition. So I could say this character has the ambition to help others. When there's a self that claims that becomes imbued with meaning, purpose, obligation, a sense of unworthiness sometimes, if it's not going right. when there's no self, which there isn't anyway, all of those things go on without the secondary need for self-improvement. So self-improvement is just another thing that happens instead of a heavy goal that needs accomplishing right now. Because there's always a desperation in the self game when it's taken seriously. So for instance, I just got back from playing soccer, and a lot of people playing were very competitive, and likely because there was a belief that there is a self doing it, needing to get better, needing to win, and that sort of thing. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. It sounds like I'm making something wrong in talking about this, but it's just what happens in a way. But what can also happen is a seeing through of that heavy overlay. So instead of two teams, for instance, battling at each other and wanting to win, being pushed around by events and reacting very strongly out of imagined self conflict, there's just a play. It's more like a play, and that doesn't mean that the game doesn't go on. There's still the game being played, and a sense that there's competitiveness maybe, but it's not taken on board as real and solid and about me. And that can be seen in every facet of the appearance or daily life or whatever. So for instance, this body mind isn't very good at driving, and there's a sense of frustration that can happen from that. But without a self, it isn't personalized, so it's not, oh, I'm a terrible driver and I'm not getting what I need, and I'm failing all the time, and all that self belief that happens, and that self imposed sort of damnation or even praise, which can turn into damnation. So the flux of self, the pendulum, sort of stops, because there isn't one. There isn't really a self. I mean, because this is the non-dual perspective, which in itself is a complete lie, because there's no such thing as a non-dual perspective. This is the end of the taking on board of perspectives. It's the end of a self that could take on perspectives, and yet everything can simply go on. This guy or whatever can just go on until it doesn't, and there's no longer a sense of trying to keep anything alive. This thing could just keel over and die, and there's no one really to mind. And that's the same everywhere. It's just that in certain organisms, the seeing of that self, the seeing through of the self has happened, and that's readily available right now. And there's no path to tread, no debt to pay, as Tony Parsons said, because being is a gentle constant. I quote other people that talk about this because there's so many potent pointers out there. And so whatever works, whatever apparent teacher that delivers the most potent pointers, that's great, because there's so much variety. But of course, the tendency is to turn non-duality into, the best religion ever, or the thing that's true. Non-duality is true, everything else isn't. You could say nothing that is spoken can ever be true, but the truth is the most obvious thing there is. It's the only thing there is. It's this. It's what's happening. It's that in which things arise. So it's the awareness behind the scenes at all times, and it is the scenes. So it's behind and within. And it's impossible to... this is feeble. These are just feeble vibrations pointing at a nothingness that's beautiful. So that's it. Self-realization is, in a way, it's a lot simpler than self-improvement, because of this. It's right now. Self-improvement is always about time. But of course there's nothing to fight against, and there's nothing to resist, because it's all that. So self-improvement is that also. So there's really nowhere to go. It's this. And it's a total mystery, I'm afraid. But thanks for listening, and feel free to write, and I love you.